So Ben Shapiro has a new book out. It's called Lions and Scavengers, the true story of America. And we've made a lot of fun of Ben Shapiro in Current Affairs magazine before, but this book really marks a descent into a deep and disturbing moral abyss. Professor Matt McManus and I have written a review of this book on Current Affairs called Ben Shapiro's latest book adopts a horrifying creators versus parasites worldview. You can check that out on Current Affairs. So here's the basics of Lions and Scavengers by Ben Shapiro. Okay, there are the good people. That's you, the audience. Then there are the bad people. That's them with a capital T. They are parasitic. They resent your success. They're trying to destroy you. They hate you. They build nothing. You are a noble lion. You have a glorious flowing mane. You are beautiful, muscular, the leader of your pride. You create everything that is good in the world, while they are circling vultures, sneering, pathetic, hideous. They want to eat your carcass. Now, they're weaker than you. You could beat them in a one-on-one fight, but the vultures don't play fair. They take advantage of the fact that you're good, moral, and decent. They're plotting your destruction. They will stop at nothing. They are coming, and so on and so forth. That's basically the attitude, the overview of the worldview and writing style that is on display in this book. Lions and Scavengers, the true story of America and her critics. And as Ben Shapiro puts it, the scavengers turn on everything with snarling fury. Yesterday they marched with Hitler, today they march with Hamas. The world continues to spin, but human nature does not change. Now look, that's an extreme political position by any metric. We, the strong, virtuous, courageous nationalists, are under siege from grasping barbarians. He does use the word barbarians, who must be met with overwhelming force, lest they dismantle our civilization. And in that, Shapiro is following other right-wing influencers who are now calling for counter-revolution, and they're treading the well-documented neoliberal, libertarian to far-right path. The right have steadily adopted more violent, uncompromising, nationalistic attitudes as the GOP has become more radically MAGAfied under the influence of out-of-the-closet fascists and authoritarians like the Bronze Age pervert and Curtis Yarvin. Now, the dangers of this kind of worldview cannot be overstated, because once one dehumanizes one's enemy, anything can be justified, up to and including genocide, which is precisely what Ben Shapiro supports in Palestine. Now, the poor quality of Shapiro's thinking has been commented on many times in Current Affairs. We've written articles about him in 2017, 2019, 2022. Now, he began his career at age 17 as a kind of pundit prodigy, and he made his name writing books with titles like How to Debate Leftists and Destroy Them, and contributing insights like Arabs like to bomb crap and live in sewage. But perhaps frightened by the sting of maturity at age 41, Ben Shapiro now seems to have decided it's time to put away the things of a child and offer philosophy that engages with deep thoughts. And so this book is littered with quotations from Shakespeare, for example. Now, unfortunately, Lions and Scavengers does display the same mix of arrogance and ignorance that we have seen consistently from Ben Shapiro. It distinguishes itself only by the extent of its descent into a viciously dehumanizing worldview that serves to justify acts of brutal violence. It's kind of like Unhumans, another recent right-wing screed, that one by Jack Posobiec and Joshua Lysek. We interviewed Mr. Lysek about it on this program, and I confronted him about his open support for Franco and Pinochet, the dictators in Spain and Chile, and he was pretty unashamed about his support for brutal methods against what he called the unhumans of the left. And so this reminded me of that in the way that it sort of portrays a class of almost less than human parasitic creatures. And it kind of shows how far the right is slipping into this paranoid fantasy about enemies. A fantasy that is now finding expression in Trump's war on immigrants, Palestinians, and the city of Chicago. Now, when we go into this book, In patented Ben Shapiro fashion, everything in here is miles wide and inches deep. Reading Ben Shapiro wrestle with ideas greater than Cardi B's lyrics, you are constantly reminded that this is a grown man who still makes his name battling anxious teenage freshmen in YouTube videos. Long stretches of this book have the feel of a first-year undergraduate essay in political theory, which is destined to climax in the inevitable end-of-semester, "Professor, is there a way?" email. Now, the book makes you wish he'd respect Adam Smith, John Locke, and Friedrich von Hayek enough to leave their work unblemished by bastardization. It would be less insulting to the richness of the Western canon if he had spent his time discussing the plausibility of black mermaids with Matt Walsh. Alas, much of Lions and Scavengers has an almost poetic quality to it. Not good poetry, mind you. This is more of the ChatGPT, a line break after every thought school, but it's certainly closer to poetry than actual argument, as a couple of excerpts will show. We see them. We see the rivers of humanity, their fists raised, their flags of third world countries and terror groups held aloft, the hatred in their eyes, climbing our monuments and defacing them, ripping down our flags and replacing them with their own. We hear them chant for our eradication, their screaming voices raised in ecstatic frenzy, the stamping of their feet as they march in unison against us. We feel their venom, their senseless and ceaseless animosity, their blame, their shame, their rage. They are all around us. They are the scavengers. The scavengers are those who produce nothing and demand everything. The scavengers are those who demand as their right that which has been produced by others, who blame their own miseries in free societies on systems of power that supposedly rob them of autonomy, who claim that failure is a virtue and success a sin. They are creatures of envy. They are creatures of ressentiment. They are creatures of destruction. Now, it goes on and on like this. The Lions are CEOs, the IDF, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Ben's wife, and the people who buy his books. The Scavengers are Marxists, Muslims, pro-Palestine student protesters, Bernie Sanders, AOC, and anyone who ever thought they were owed a living wage. And if you're thinking, surely it must be a little more complicated than this, the world is more than a children's fable about good lions and bad scavengers, well, reader, we assure you, that's all there is to it. It's a bifurcation even more superficial than the oppressor/oppressed binary that so many people on the right project into left-wing thinking in order to dismiss it as reductive. Now, in the book's acknowledgments, Ben Shapiro admits Lions and Scavengers wasn't written with cold objectivity, I'll say, but rather in a white heat. Lions and Scavengers does feel like a rage post casting so much more heat than light. Now, Lions and Scavengers is a perfect encapsulation of Brandolini's law of bullshit, which is that the energy required to refute bullshit is orders of magnitude greater than the energy required to produce bullshit. Canvassing all the errors, shrill hyperbole, and emotional grandstanding in Shapiro's work would require a tome that would outgirth the 3 volumes of Marx's Capital. And I know our viewers have busy lives, and so I care enough not to subject you to too much more of Shapiro's angsty poetry. For example, family, community, nation, pride. We must all be lions. Our pride demands it. Okay, no more Shapiro poetry. Promise. Now, one thing that becomes clear when reading Shapiro's book is the lightness of his engagement with the many far more serious figures who are cited throughout this screed. That includes not just those he despises, like Frantz Fanon, Jean-Paul Sartre, but even the authors he invokes positively. Their nuanced and multifaceted perspectives are ignored to make way for Shapiro's breakneck weaponization of out-of-context quotes. For example, Shapiro has lots of good things to say about Adam Smith, defender extraordinaire of capitalism. In Chapter 3, he cites Smith's comments in the Lectures on Jurisprudence to the effect that free markets reward honesty, punctuality, and decency. Now, later in the same chapter, Shapiro admits that a society cannot live on Walmarts alone. It also requires public virtue. He notes that Smith famously understood just this. Discussing the theory of moral sentiments, Shapiro approvingly argues that Smith posited human beings exchange regard and esteem In the same way, they exchange goods and services. Now, much of Lions and Scavengers is taken up with exploring how these public virtues have been distorted. Of course, the answer is that it's largely the left's fault. If only Smith, however, had taken the time in the theory of moral sentiments to weigh in on the most great and universal cause of the corruption of our moral sentiments and their attendant virtues. Oh, wait, he did. Quote from Adam Smith, "This disposition to admire and almost to worship the rich and the powerful, and to despise or at least to neglect persons of poor and mean condition, though necessary both to establish and maintain the distinctions of rank and the order of society, is at the same time the great and most universal cause of the corruption of our moral sentiments. That wealth and greatness are often regarded with the respect and admiration which are due only to wisdom and virtue, and that the contempt of which vice and folly are the only proper objects is often most unjustly bestowed on poverty and weakness, has been the complaint of moralists in all ages." Now, were Smith alive today, he might note that Lions and Scavengers, which rhapsodizes about how wage workers certainly provide a valuable service, but technological and material progress is built on the back of the entrepreneur. For it is the entrepreneur who risks it all to build something. That actually contributes a lot to the corruption of our moral sentiments that Smith warned about. That instinct he cited to admire and almost worship the rich and the powerful. Now, as Martha Nussbaum emphasizes in the cosmopolitan tradition, whenever the choice came down to siding with the workers or capitalists, Adam Smith almost invariably chose the former. That includes through taxing the luxuries of the wealthy, since the indolence and vanity of the rich is made to contribute in a very easy manner to the relief of the poor. Now, the misunderstanding is even greater with those thinkers Shapiro's criticizing, like Douglas Murray, whose work we've reviewed in Current Affairs before. He similarly heaps abuse on the late Edward Said, seeing Said as a champion of a thoughtless anti-Westernism. And like Murray, he seems to be totally unacquainted with Edward Said's lifetime of study and appreciation of the Western canon, including classical music and English literature. But the problems go beyond Shapiro's misunderstandings of the thinkers he cites. The entire core of the book's argument is rotten. While its subtitle presents it as the story of America, Lions and Scavengers isn't in fact a story of America or a historical work at all, but a polemic, arguing that essentially society's losers deserve their fate and should stop complaining, while the rich deserve their riches.
What's a lion? What's a scavenger?
The basic idea is that there are parts of us, or you can say cultures, groups, depending on how you're characterizing it, who are more apt to build, who believe that there is an active duty in the world to make the world better, to build social fabric, to defend a civilization that is worthwhile, to innovate, to protect things that are good. And then there are people who are basically rooted in envy and are seeking to tear down all of those things.
That second class of people, the vulture-like scavengers, are simply unwilling to accept their own natural inferiority. He says, "Individuals are equal in their rights, but not in their qualities. I have the same rights that you do, but that does not mean that we each have precisely the same earning capacity. LeBron James and I have the same rights, but he is a far better basketball player than I am. Meanwhile, I'd venture to say I've probably read a few more books cover to cover than he has. That isn't unjust, unless by unjust we simply mean that we wish that God had made us all identical in every way at the outset of life. And if that's our complaint, we ought to grow up, anger at God for not making the world the way you want it. Is it justice? It's arrogance, stupidity, and childishness. Just as James did not work for his height or base athletic ability, I did not work for my inherent level of intelligence," Shapiro says. "But the inequalities that result cannot be criticized or rectified through policy." And yes, Shapiro did just suggest there that he is to intellectual pursuits as LeBron James is to basketball, despite, as we have noted, showing clear evidence that he doesn't read the books he writes about. Ben's arguments for his riches resulting from his superior intelligence comes in the middle of hundreds of pages demonstrating his lack of such intelligence. Now, Shapiro often seems personally, even anxiously invested in meritocratic mythologies that suggest he's better than other people. We're reminded here of Max Weber's quip in The Social Psychology of World Religions, where he says, "The fortunate man is seldom satisfied with the fact of being fortunate. Beyond this, he needs to know that he has a right to his good fortune. He wants to be convinced he deserves it, and above all, that he deserves it in comparison with others. Good fortune thus wants to be legitimate fortune." In case there's any doubt about whether Shapiro thinks he's among the great lions, his book features a long, self-applauding section in which Shapiro congratulates himself for showing entrepreneurial spirit in founding the Daily Wire, the largest online conservative media company in the world, with hundreds of employees and millions of consumers. Those of us who have sat through the film Lady Ballers may be less appreciative of this achievement. Ironically, the major contribution of the Daily Wire seems to be affirming the bottomless self-pity that has essentially become the mainstream of conservative ressentiment. Now look, intellectually serious people must make an effort always to empathetically engage with the ideas they are criticizing, so as to ensure they understand them. That's why, despite the agony of doing so, Professor Matt McManus and I read every page of this book and other books by Ben Shapiro in order to write about them. But Ben Shapiro doesn't do the same, and that leads him to a state of complete confusion about the motives of his enemies. For instance, he told Ezra Klein that the fundamental idea of the book came when he saw a pro-Palestine, or in his words, pro-Hamas, protest.
There was a gigantic protest, what I would characterize controversial is a pro-Hamas protest in the middle of London. And the groups that were protesting were people who ranged from very far left on social issues, who would certainly not agree on social issues with people who were standing for Hamas, people who were fans of Hamas, people who were just opponents of capitalism. And it occurred to me, why are all these people marching together? What do they have in common?
So Shapiro there seems incapable of even imagining the possibility that pro-Palestine protesters are motivated by, I don't know, a serious and honest horror at what Israel has done to Gaza. The United Nations has just released a detailed report concluding definitively that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Now, Shapiro doesn't examine, he doesn't refute the evidence that Palestine activists present for their positions. He doesn't even seem interested in the factual record at all. So much for facts don't care about your feelings. He looks out on the protest, and all he sees are a bunch of scavengers trying to tear down the civilization that he and his fellow lions have built. Now, when Ezra Klein asked Ben Shapiro if he thought Bernie Sanders is just an enemy of Western civilization, Shapiro replied,
yes. And the reason I say that is because, again, I think that the easy part of all politics and all of human life is to find the places where you think that life has been unfair to people, because life is sometimes unfair to people. The question is how you direct that. Has he directed that toward actually building better systems? Or has he spent his entire career yelling at people who have become wealthy? Has he maligned them as morally inferior for having developed wealth? Has he decided that there is a class of people who are the great exploiters in his moral narrative and who must be torn to the ground? Billionaires shouldn't exist.
But in fact, Bernie has directed his life toward building better systems. Medicare for All, which Bernie has been a tireless advocate of, is a better healthcare financing system. Shapiro doesn't make any effort to actually engage with the case for these policies. For him, it's enough to rant that the people who want workplace safety protections and good healthcare are simply scavengers. Now, lions and scavengers here is representative of the race to the moral and intellectual bottom that has gripped a right wing who seem to be engaged in a vast limbo contest to see how low their standards can go. It's a remarkably pretentious book that butchers and oversimplifies complex ideas to avoid reflecting on them, which makes the endlessly inflated rhetoric about lions seem even more absurd. I don't think Ben Shapiro is a lion, but I do think that books like this that posit this kind of incredibly reductive framework where some of us are just parasitic and he and the people in his class are the good people. I think these are very, very dangerous, and I really think that in Gaza right now, we see the horrific logical endpoint of actually internalizing this kind of horrendous ideology. So you're used to hearing me tell you to subscribe to the print edition of Current Affairs, and you should subscribe to the print edition of Current Affairs. But today I want to talk to you about someone else you should support, because there are friends over at the Majority Report. I find it really, really hard to find intelligent, informed commentary on the news. There's so much bullshit in the world. And we've gotten to know and become friends with the Majority Report because we just really respect the work that they do over there. Sam and Emma and the staff there do fantastic research. They know what they're talking about. They focus on important topics. I've been on their show, and, you know, at a time when so many supposedly independent media outlets are compromised by outside interests, they're not, we're not, and so we stick together. Majority Report is really a beacon of genuine free thought. So we are delighted to partner with them. Their kind of outlet is really rare and special and needs to be supported. And so they've agreed to give our readers a deal on memberships there, and we're giving their listeners, in exchange, a deal on Current Affairs subscription. So they are offering, Majority Report with Sam Cedar, offering discount rate for membership there to all Current Affairs readers, $5 a month for 6 months, and you can use the code Current Affairs at checkout. And so your membership there keeps the Majority Report possible. It'll give you access to their daily fun half, to all bonus content, commercial free, 5 days a week, first access to discounted live show tickets, first access to limited run merch. So if you join with that special discounted rate, you can support the Majority Report with Sam Cedar. They are unbought and unbossed. And as I say, just personally, we really like them. We really respect them. And it's been great to get to work with them. So support Current Affairs, read Current Affairs, but also support all independent left media. And Majority Report is a great example of that.